For B, now we're going to look at solving by using the quadratic formula because, of course, not every quadratic can be factored. Okay, so here is the quadratic formula. Hopefully you've seen this before in Algebra 1. X equals negative b plus or minus b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. Alright, and your equation has to be in standard form. So a goes with x squared, b goes with x, and c is the constant. Okay, so we're going to solve the equation using the quadratic formula. So first thing I need to do is identify my a, b, and c. So it's just the coefficient. So 2 is going to be my a. So in my formula, anywhere I see an a, I'm going to replace it with 2. Alright, my coefficient for b is 5, and it's positive 5. So anywhere I see a b, I'm going to go ahead and plug in at 5. And then for C, you always have to take into account the sign. So C is going to be negative 12. So where this C is, I'm going to replace it with a negative 12. And so this is, we're going to plug it in and go. So X equals negative B. All right, and B is 5. So negative 5 plus or minus the square root of b squared, so that's going to be 5 squared, minus 4 times a times c, which is negative 12. And all of this is over 2 times a. Okay, now when we go to simplify this, my suggestion to you is that you put everything that is underneath the radical, so this 5 squared minus 4 times 2 times negative 12, put that in your calculator without the square root, just what's under it, exactly as it is written, okay, all at one time. Because what happens is people end up messing up these negatives, so just put the whole thing in there all at one time. Alright, so on my calculator, I'm going to put, let me slide this over so I can read it, okay, 5 squared minus 4 times 2 times negative 12. Alright, and I get 121 there. So I'm going to have negative 5 plus or minus the square root of 121 all over 2 times 2 is 4. Alright, then we have to simplify the square roots here. So the square root of 121 is 11. So now I have negative 5 plus or minus 11 over 4. And now I'm going to split this apart into two separate equations. So I have x equals negative 5 plus 11 divided by 4. And x equals negative 5 minus 11 divided by 4. We have to have both the plus and the minus. Alright, negative 5 plus 11 is 6. 6 over 4 would simplify to 3 over 2, so that's one of my solutions. Negative 5 minus 11 is going to be negative 16 over 4 would be negative 4. So my two solutions are 3/2 and negative 4. Alright, I'm going to skip ahead to example 3. 2n squared minus 12 equals negative 20n. Before you can use the quadratic formula, you have to have one side equal to 0. So I'm going to add 20n to both sides. So now I have 2n squared plus 20n minus 12. So now I need to identify my a, b, and c. Alright, so a is going to be 2. B is going to be positive 20. And c is going to be negative 12. So I can plug that in now to my quadratic formula. So x equals negative b, negative 20, plus or minus the square root of b squared, 20 squared, minus 4 times a times c, all over 2 times a. And again, we're going to put this whole thing in your calculator all at once. Alright, so we get negative 20 plus or minus the square root of 496 all over 2 times 2, which is 4. Now, 496 is not a perfect square. you need to simplify that perfect square. And I don't want to go over too much of a review of that right now just because I don't want to make this video too long, but don't worry if you don't remember. We can go over that in class and I'll give you some extra practice there. But the square root of 496 is going to simplify to 4 square root 31. All right, and this is all over 4. So now I can, if everything, I have negative 20 and 4, they are both divisible by 4. So I would have negative 5 plus or minus the square root of 31. And that is as simplified as we can get. So those would be our two solutions, negative 5 plus the square root of 31 and negative 5 minus the square root of 31. Okay, next thing we're going to talk about is something called the discriminant. So that's the part of the quadratic formula that's under the square root, that b squared minus 4ac. And the discriminant helps us figure out how many solutions something has. So if the discriminant is positive, so if you plug in the numbers for b squared minus 4ac and you get any positive number, there are two real solutions. And if you think about it, that makes sense because if I take the square root of something, I have to do plus or minus. So those are my two solutions, the plus and the minus. Okay, if what is under the square root is equal to 0, there's only one real solution. Okay, because plus or minus 0 is still going to give me the same number, so I'm only going to have one solution. If b squared minus 4ac is negative, there are no real solutions because we cannot take the square root of a negative number. Okay, so an example, we have 2x squared minus 7x minus 13 equals negative 10. We want to know how many solutions are there and what are the solutions. So the first thing that I need to do is make this equal to 0. That's what we always have to do. So I'm going to add 10 to both sides. So now I have 2x squared minus 7x minus 3 equals 0. Okay, and then the discriminant is just the b squared minus 4ac. So again, let's identify. A is going to be 2. All right, b is going to be negative 7, and c is going to be negative 3. So the discriminant is just that b squared minus 4ac part. So b squared negative 7 squared minus 4 times a times c. Now, I wrote this negative 7 inside parentheses for a reason. When you put it in your calculator, put it in parentheses. Otherwise, your calculator will give you a negative number, and that's not right. Negative 7 squared is positive 49. So please always put negative numbers in parentheses when you are squaring them. Okay, so the value of the discriminant here is 73. That is a positive number. A positive number means there are two solutions, so two real solutions to this equation. And then what are the solutions? Well, for that we're actually going to use the whole quadratic formula. So x equals negative b. Negative 7 is positive 7. Plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac, we already know is 73, all over 2 times a. All right, so that's 7 plus or minus the square root of 73, all over 4. All right, the square root of 73 cannot be simplified any further, and 7 and 4, those two coefficients cannot be simplified any further. So these are my two solutions, 7 plus the square root of 73 and 7 minus the square root of 73 over 4. Okay, and that's it for 4b.